We're going to start off with current events, stuff that's in the news. And Aria is going to walk us through. She has a thing in the news that she thinks is interesting. All right, let's hear Aria.
Okay, are you guys familiar with Lana Del Rey, the folk/pop singer?
Everyone's muted, but I am familiar, yes.
Yes, good. Okay, so are you familiar? Yes.
Uh-huh.
So this past week, Lana Del Rey decided to address claims that she glamorizes abuse in an Instagram post. She says the following: Doja Cat, Ariana Grande, Cardi B, Nicki Minaj, and Beyonce have had number one songs. Had number ones with songs about being sexy, wearing too little clothes, fucking and cheating, etc. I'm fed up with female writers and old singers saying that I glamorize abuse, when in reality, I'm just a glamorous person singing about the realities of what we're all now seeing as very prevalently emotionally abusive relationships all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
I think it's interesting that she kind of tried to spin it off as like, we didn't realize our relationships were abusive until it seems like just recently. Like coronavirus has helped us to realize our relationships are abusive or something.
Yeah. Or interestingly, that her take on abuse is actually superior to others, right?
Mm-hmm.
By saying that other singers are channeling their abuse in ways like fucking, cheating, or wearing too little clothes, seems a little bit slut-shaming, right?
Yeah, really judgmental, I would have to say.
Yes.
Like if you're going to be like, hey, this is just, the way I express myself, other people express themselves like this, but I mean, fucking, cheating, like these are kind of derogatory words. They're not like words where it's like, like trying to better themselves or, like kind of positive.
Or expressing themselves.
Yeah, stripping is a good example. It really does seem like she's kind of choosing the slut shaming ones.
These things are frowned upon, but not the way that she says it.
And it's weird too, because she's like, her main point seems to be like, I'm not glamorizing abusive relationships, but she doesn't address that at all. Instead, she just like name drops a bunch of people and then starts saying like all the things that are bad about them. There's a logical fallacy that kind of deals with this. It's tu quoque, which is you too. But usually, like you did it too. Usually though, you use the fallacy, you shouldn't be using it anyways because it's a fallacy. But usually you use it against the person who is lodging attacks at you. You don't go then horizontally to other people and then be like, well, so let's say like, this is a classic one. So when I was in Russia, every time people would be like, oh, look at your crazy human rights violations during the Soviet Union time period, right? And then they would say, and Americans are lynching Negroes. I say this because that's what they said, right? There's even a Wikipedia page about this, which is basically a tu quoque thing. Like, hey, you say that we have civil rights violations. Look at your own country. You guys are super racist and you're like super violent about it. And you're the ones with the problems, right? So that's usually what it's lodged against. But this would be as if like America says, hey, Soviet Union, you have terrible civil rights violations. And they're like, so does Uzbekistan or whatever.
Yeah.
So does
my
China.
ex-girlfriend. Yeah, so does China. My ex-girlfriend blamed it on internalized misogyny.
Okay.
Right?
But what does internalized misogyny mean?
So I think my ex-girlfriend kind of has the dictionary definition mixed up, right? I think she sees Lana Del Rey's comments as defending the abusive relationships that she's been in and her reactions to them. But actually, I think it's more of horizontal hostility happening.
What is that?
Right? So horizontal hostility is often occurs in already a minority group, right? And every group has a leader. And it occurs when members of a targeted group believe, act on, or enforce the dominant system of discrimination and oppression.
So the minority group themselves become the oppressors?
Yes, they oppress the other members of the group.
So you can kind of see this because I often see like sometimes I say, hey, psychopathy is a little bit like autism. And do you think that autistic people or, mostly like family members of autistic people, parents of autistic children, you think they like that? That comparison? There's a lot of horizontal hostility going on there.
And with Lana Del Rey's comments, I think it's a little bit like institutionalized bullying happening, right? Later on in the post, she defends all of the women, right? Or I think it actually was a second and third post, right? Where
Yeah.
she's like, I am friends with all of these women, therefore I'm not judging them. But
Mm-hmm.
it looks an awful lot like judging them, right?
Yeah, like why would you call out names anyways? I don't understand that. Like it seems
Yeah.
to be clearly you want to like draw attention to them instead of other people yourself, you know, which is like what I'm saying, which is like this tu quoque kind of like strategy.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think that Lana perhaps doesn't even recognize that she was being judgmental, right?
Yes.
Often the oppressor of the minority doesn't realize what they're doing, right? But it is a little bit like bullying. Why? She's singling people out, but she's saying her way of describing abuse and glamorizing abuse is better.
But
It's
don't
more
they say,
delicate.
yeah, don't they say that this is like a common, like men hate women, but also women hate women. And this is
Women
kind
hate
of,
women, yes.
yeah, why they say women hate women. But I got this too. Like I got this as a woman. And I think it's interesting when we talk about, because I don't really identify as being super female. You know, I don't even really identify as being non-binary or whatever. I just don't identify with hardly anything. Right. But that was always like, I even like wrote about it in the book. If you remember the little chalk lines, it's like women want you to look a particular way, act a particular way. Otherwise, you're like bringing like shame to the entire gender, you know, and they feel it. And they're like, we don't like this. And so there is this, you know, there's some good parts of socialization, but it seems like there are all these kind of really negative parts too, where it's like lose your identity in this socialization process. We want you to go to school from X hours to X hours, you know, like act and engage in all these particular ways. These are the only socially acceptable ways to basically live your life. And if you're constantly getting that message, then I could see how, number one, you know, like having like a good, strong sense of your own identity, sense of self is going to be problematic, not just with people with personality disorders, but maybe even suggest why personality disorders might be on the rise if they are. But two, why you'd end up with situations where people feel constantly attacked, they feel constantly put upon by society, that they're like, I'm just going to lash out and attack whoever. And the easiest people, honestly, to attack, though, are these people of weaker position. So it's not a surprise, maybe, that women attack other women, because women are weak, you know, like if you attack a man, you'll get in trouble. If you attack a woman, then it's like, you know, what can they do? They don't have like that much power anyways. Okay, George, I'll unmute you.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that maybe it's because she's identifying as those other people who are not getting victimized in the way that she is. I mean, I don't really know a lot about any of these people that we're talking about, but it seemed from what was read out that she's troubled by the fact that other people are getting away with it somehow, which does seem slightly odd that she's stressed about that rather than addressing the core thing, which is why the hell shouldn't I be allowed to sing about anything that I want to sing about it, and whose business is it anyway? If you want to buy my records, buy my records, you know? I mean, it seems fairly straightforward.
You know, and another weird thing about the people that she chose is they're all 100% biracial. You know, there are at least biracial, you know, but there are like plenty of minority singers, female singers and stuff. But it's kind of interesting. She, as a white woman, shows all these different people. There is like this weird, like kind of comparison. It's exactly what you say. And actually, Aria loves Kanye West. And Kanye West has a quote, what is it, about being 100% you or 100 times you or something?
Yes, you're 100th yourself.
Which
you
actually means
so well.
100, like 1 over 100, which is 1%, which is not that much. So it's a funny thing that he says, but he's basically like, you have to be you to the nth degree, which interestingly, here's like, I think the funny kind of rub. And George is our guest along with Alex, who I'll unmute in a hot second. But and we'll get them to introduce themselves. There are empath, psychopath relationships. George being the psychopath, and Alex, I don't know how Alex identifies. You know, not psychopathic though, but I don't know, normal or neurotypical or something. Man, now I've just lost my train of thought. Oh well, we'll just unmute Alex and get Alex to. So do you want to introduce yourself, George? Kind of tell us a little bit about you, a little bit like about like maybe why you might identify as being psychopathic, and then we'll hear from Alex.
Yeah, well, primarily it was actually through reading your book, which Alex wanted me to read. So I read it, and then I thought, well, if that's what being sociopathic is, then I definitely am. But
Hmm.
I would never have identified as that prior to that. And it was really just understanding it and I like the way that you talked about the fact that some identification in these terms is really only brought about in a situation where there's a problem. You know, people don't make these categorizations on people generally if you're keeping your nose clean and out of trouble.
Right.
You know, it's only if you fall in the beam of the radar that somebody wants to then classify you in a certain kind of a way that they make these kind of choices. And it seems to me that there might be absolutely loads of people who identify well, whose thinking is more aligned to the way that I do. And I've had quite a few conversations with Alex about the fact that I also feel that mine is a slightly learned behaviour, and I don't think that these things are actually. I think they're more malleable than we might think. They're not hard binaries that are forced on you. That certain things in your conditioning can actually lead you to, I feel like those are those things which Alex would then point out, well, that's super sociopathic, that's super sociopathic, are things that I've really cultivated quite hard in my life.
So I have kind of a theory, George, and it's like I didn't really voice it that much in the first book, a little bit though, that like a lot of the psychopathic traits kind of come from weak sense of self, and then the way that they manifest themselves is like highly dependent then on your environment, right? Because you just imagine weak sense of self is basically, it's like it's not like a solid, it's more like a liquid, or maybe even a gas form, and so it's going to take kind of the shape of like whatever container it's in. So like that environment seems to be highly like determinative in terms of how you're going to end up, what traits are going to end up manifesting themselves. Now, are you saying something kind of like that, or are you kind of saying that for you think it's more nature and less nurture?
Well, I totally agree with that. I don't think the two are mutually exclusive, although it's not exactly what I was saying. But I do agree with what the point you've just made, and I do think that's that thing about self. I mean, I trained as an actor and I was an actor for many years, and a fundamental part of that training for me was to accept the fact that if I was going to do the job properly, I had to accept that nothing human was foreign to me. So I had to be able to look at everything human as though I had done it myself. And I think in that process, that changes you. That changes the way that you relate to things. And it relates very strongly to what you're saying about not having a strong sense of self, because you think anything that anybody has done, I could do that. I know where that resides in me, and I can locate that, and I can access it and work with it.
Yeah, actually, that reminds me a little bit what I was going to say before. The odd thing about psychopaths, with regard to Lana Del Rey, is that we can be very iconoclastic. We can be very much like Kanye West, being like the nth degree of ourselves, and yet there's a weak sense of self. Like there's something in us that refuses to be socialized, and that's the part that the iconoclastic behavior comes from. But then it's like, well, what are we actually being iconoclastic about? We have a hard time, I think, describing that. So last week, we had a guest who was like, please don't ask me any questions about myself. I have a hard time answering them, right? That was kind of her suggestion. And I think that's kind of the issue that we're talking about, like with this weak sense of self. Like we can turn up the volume super loud, much louder than normal people can. And we can like stick to a position much better than they can. But I think we're like largely choosing those positions arbitrarily, or that they're opportunistic in the moment, or, we could drop them just as easily, in an hour from now and just like flip our position and just be completely opposite. Do you relate to that, George?
Yeah, I do, except that I'd just add that you could also, as well as those things about just flipping your position or taking a stance, I think you can actually try and create your own kind of moral compass. I mean, I noticed that in your book you talk about your religion as being part of what has formed a certain basis for you to have a grounding that doesn't let you get too far into a bad place. But I mean, I would say I've rejected all of those things, but I've tried to create my own religion based on my own understanding of the world, you know. So I would say that my position is often kind of got a moral position, but that might not relate in any way to what the standard narrative is for how one ought to behave. It's just what seems to me to be most logical and straightforward, and I don't understand why more people don't think like I do.
Yes. So I'll give you kind of a good example of how I experienced that. You know, I like to think that there's more consistency, but also there's less consistency. I have to argue, you know, I have to agree with that. But I just watched a video this morning of people in the United States have kind of politicized mask wearing. You know, so there are all these people, it's a video clip of everybody refusing to wear masks, getting in fights with people because they're being asked to wear masks, spitting on people, coughing on people. And these people are like kind of taking the idea of freedom to this kind of weird extreme. And I thought, but nobody does that about wearing clothes. You know, that is also a kind of arbitrary, it's loosely related to hygiene. You know, probably even more loosely related to hygiene than mask wearing is, even if you have like a pretty dim view of how effective masks are from preventing infection, right? So it's like these people are kind of like, they say that other people are sheeple, and that's the crazy thing that they get like caught up about, but they're sheeple too in just ways that they can't recognize. Like they would never think that wearing clothes was like a sheeple way of thinking, but like my mind does think that way, you know. Like when I do put on clothes are the same as masks to me, you know. So it's like it is kind of consistent in its own way. I'm not saying it's more consistent necessarily, because there are weird ways in which it's inconsistent, but it's just kind of different, you know.
No, I totally relate to that. In fact, I remember an early experience that I had was in fact just that. I loved streaking when I was young, running around with no clothes on. And there was a certain point in age when there were elements of my family who were like really frowning on it. And I just thought, Jesus, what the fuck is that? You know, it just doesn't seem right. You know, you wear no clothes. It's your body. It's what you were born with. I mean, how is it a problem? Yeah. But I totally get what you mean about the people who with the mask wearing and lots of things about social distancing in general are very, very big here at the moment, and you know, people's reaction to it is very, very different. And I would say mine is quite fluid, depending on what effect I want to have on certain people, an audience that I'm playing to, that I might at one moment be quite protective of a situation where I might have a go at somebody outside who's passing too close, or, you know, something like that. But essentially, it's not about a fear or like my belief in that. It's about that I want somebody else who's near me to think that I'm taking this seriously.
Right.
Do you see what I mean?
Yes. So there's a word that I've heard about that, impression management. But here's like, it's interesting because sometimes I think we are just more honest about this type of thing than normal people are. Because I just read a study that said that showing outrage, like moral outrage, like, oh, I'm outraged that this happened, you know, somebody was discriminated against, or XYZ, like women don't get paid as much as men. You know, people who show that moral outrage, they said that it's possible that they do it as a dating strategy. Because in the study, they took, I guess, mostly male subjects. So I guess it was very heteronormative in a way study. They took a bunch of male subjects and they had them express outrage. And then they asked the female subjects how they would rate them in terms of being a viable partner. And definitely the people who showed more moral outrage scored higher in terms of being a viable partner. The thought being that, well, then, you know, if they're so outraged by this particular situation, they're more likely, or they're less likely to engage in infidelity, you know, other types of cheating, you know, financial misconduct, these sorts of things that you might be concerned about when you're considering a mate.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that's exactly right. That's exactly why I do it.
Yeah. So impression management.
In certain situations.
Yeah, maybe this. Yeah, we have a segment that we get to at the end, but maybe this is our segment, which is psychopaths. They're just like us. So in this sense, maybe this is our psychopaths. They're just like us. You guys do impression management by wearing clothes and whatever else, and not wearing a mask, I guess, is some sort of political statement. And we also do impression management, kind of choose to act in a particular situation based on how it's going to be viewed by the audience, so to speak. But let's hear from Alex.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, I think that that's one thing I share in common with sociopaths. I don't really have a sense of self, so I do that completely. And I mean, from a very young age, I was aware that I was completely acting in a way that I was trying to be what my parents wanted me to be, so I was completely acting. And then I was very aware at a conscious age, when I reached about 12, I was like, well, who shall I be now? So I actually got bits of people from books and stuff like that, and basically created an identity. And then later on in life, after I had some problems and I kind of got help for those problems, I was kind of left with trying to actually just strip all that away and be me, and I kind of didn't know what that was. Yeah. So that's one thing. I definitely, there are other things that make me think that I'm almost the opposite of sociopathic, but there are quite a few things which I share in common, and also a lot of the way that George thinks, which is very different from me. Like some things that he doesn't think are sociopathic at all, I'll be like, oh God, don't say that to anyone but me. But like some of the things that he says, and when he explains the logic, I'm like, oh my God, like your way of thinking is superior to mine in that way, and I will take that and use that. Whereas with other things, I will think, oh, you were missing something just because you have never experienced it, so I'll take my way on that one. So yeah, I kind of, what was the question again? Sorry, I get really...
No, it was super good. Yes, absolutely. I a couple things, hopefully I'll remember these, but one, what do you think caused you to lose the sense of self? Two, follow up would be like, why did you suddenly want to kind of fix that in your later life? And three, this idea of like, psychopaths sometimes just be missing out on things is really fascinating. So yeah. Let's talk, maybe briefly, because we just got our little 10-minute warning up.
Okay. Well, why did I start doing it? Because it seemed to be expected of me, and there's always been like someone who's sociopathic in my life from quite a young age. And the dynamics in my family meant that I felt I was supposed to fulfill a certain role, and so I completely just made up what that was and just kind of rolled with that. And then the things that changed as a teenager, so I adapted. And then I was very super reckless and like didn't care about what happened to me and everything in my 20s, got in a lot of trouble, then eventually entered a 12-step program, and that was why I kind of had to, the whole thing about that is being true to yourself, and I kind of thought, well, I have no idea like who I am. So that was that one. And the thing about our different views and what's valuable, and the thing that I think George is like missing out on, like George, can I like explain like green and orange?
Yeah, go for it. It helped me.
Yeah, so basically we kept trying to do a conventional, well, we kept periodically trying to do a conventional-ish, but not completely conventional, like boyfriend type thing, and it kept not working because I guess although I really knew from the first date, I thought that George was a sociopath, I kind of like didn't know, so I was kind of like I was, I guess, like the ways he was responding to things, I thought, well, if he's not a sociopath, that's like very, like, that's not, so I guess I had expectations because of that. But once we kind of broke up, I thought I've got nothing left to lose, because I just didn't want to offend him, because there's so much, it's got such negative connotations, the word. And I really didn't mean it like that. Because I don't see sociopathy as a bad thing. It can be a superpower, just like being an empath can have superpowers. And so I eventually just said, there's nothing left to lose. I'm just going to ask you, like, are you a pro-social psychopath or sociopath? I love you so much, but are you a pro-social psychopath? And yeah, his reaction was really cool. He was just like, oh, I don't know if I've ever labeled myself as that. Maybe I should. And and then he went and like read your book and did some like research and stuff. And yeah, then basically we kind of reconnected, and we have an undefinable but like awesome relationship on a completely different basis. And I was really fascinated, because it seemed that we would say words and we were meaning different things. And so we'd get frustrated, because I'd be like, well, clearly that isn't the case, because you said that. And for example, the ways in which we experience love seem to be different. And so I was like, I'm really curious, I'm really fascinated to know like what your view is and your perspective, and in exchange I will share what mine is, because that might be useful to you. And so we kind of did that, and basically I see, so say I'm going to try and do this in a clear way, but I might struggle. So so for example, with love, or with anything else really, it could be any other topic, but say with love, say it's actually purple, the color purple. Yeah, it's a bit, and so say George, when he says something about love, he says purple, but he's actually meaning orange, but he's always called orange purple. And then say that when I say love, I say purple, but I actually mean green, because that's what I've always been told is the word. And so they mean completely different things to us. And so then when we both talk about purple, we're at cross purposes. And so that happens with a lot of things, like love is just like an example. So it was really interesting to actually find out what the different things meant to each of us, and to respect our differences. And also then it just really, I was so curious about all the different ways that he processed and responded to things, because in some ways we're really similar, in some ways we're the opposite. And some of the things I do are incomprehensible to George. He just thinks that's crazy. That's crazy. And some of the things that he says, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe he just said that. And he doesn't even know he said anything that a non-sociopath would find like really, like, yeah, like abnormal, I guess, like not what they would expect. So to me, I'm just like, I'm just curious, and I kind of really respect our differences, and I adore George exactly as he is, and there was absolutely nothing I would change about him. And so I think that sociopathy, the idea that it's a bad thing, or it's like, I think that's I hate that, because I see, yeah, like I said, there are superpowers, and there are, you know, like with all personality types as well, there are strengths and weaknesses, and you know, some sociopaths can do bad shit, but some empaths can too. So so yeah, that was the answer to that one, I think. Sorry if I rambled.
No, you did a great job. And George, what is it like being in a relationship with Alex?
It's amazing. I mean, it's hard for me to totally understand the subtleties of where Alex has problems, because, you know, there's a lot of things to me which feel quite similar now than they did before, you know, because I'm still experiencing it in a similar way, and I'm always having to check in, is this okay within the context of the formality that you want to have around the relationship at the moment. You know, can we do this? Is that allowed in your system? Because for me, I can allow a lot more things because of the way that I process things. And clearly clearly, I mean, I understand a lot more things. I mean, Alex has taught me an incredible number of things and bringing my attention to things. I mean, it was a revelation to be told all this, you know, to have that thing come up and then to look into it and read your book and then go, well, if that's what that is, then I am. Because at the time when you know, I knew for a long time Alex was really frightened about saying, oh, if I knew this thing, then everything could be all right. And I still don't fully understand why knowing that you can identify me as a sociopath makes it okay. I still don't understand that, but I'm delighted that it does. But the point I'm making is if you asked anyone, you know, I even have told a few friends of mine, but you know, Alex thinks that's what I am, and you know, I stopped because just like nobody believes it. Nobody would believe I was a sociopath. I know, you know, I keep it very well hidden. I mean, there are the odd things that can come out, especially things to do with animals that can happen. That I could say things that.
That was one of the things where I was like, don't tell anyone else that.
So you can't share, George.
Well, you can share if it's up to you.
Yeah, yeah, it's not dissimilar to that piece that was very much in, you know, as an opener in your book. You know, it was a great way to make an identification. You know, I mean, but you see, I would have identified that as just being like a farmer. You know
Right.
what I mean? I mean, not that I am a farmer, but you know, it's like I had farmers in the family, and it was just a different attitude towards animals.
See, that's the thing,
So,
you know, I think with so much normal people, what they believe is kind of socialization anyways. You know, if you're a farmer, you see it differently. And I get a lot of different reactions based on that. The thing that actually most people were offended by in the book was when I said I was smarter than everyone else. That was by far the most universally offensive thing. And that kind of surprised me. We have a quick question. I don't think we have time for it, though. I'm sorry, Paula. We will get to it next week. But I want to thank Alex and George for coming on. It was very, very enlightening to hear you talk. And I have a bunch of positive thoughts about your relationship. I think it's great that you guys are able to understand each other, even though you're so different.
Thank you very much. It's been very nice to meet you.
Yes.
Thank you so much for writing the book, because it has really helped me in loads of ways as well. So thank you.